Growing up, I was always given clothes that were too big. You'll grow into them, my mum would tell me, as she sewed temporary stitches into my flared jeans so that they wouldn't drag under my shoes on the way to school. I was a short kid, a fact only reinforced in basketball camp that I attended the week before secondary school started. The teacher lined everyone up according to height, and in a move that seems incredibly unfair now, our teams were allocated upon this lineup. All the tall girls together, all the short girls together. I was significantly shorter than everyone in my year. At 12, I barely reached 5 foot. The teacher kept nudging me down a spot until I was down at the very end of the line. Myself and one other girl were at the very bottom and put with all our fellow shorties in what was essentially the late bloomers team. Much like my baggy, flared jeans, I grew into the practice of comparison as I aged. I would pray to a god I didn't even believe in to make me taller, and then in fourth year, my prayers were answered. I took a monumental growth spurt, shooting from 5'1" to my now 5'8" over summer holidays. Only now, instead of feeling like a little girl beside my classmates, like I did the years previously, I felt like a towering beast. I was the same height as all the boys, and I craved to be petite again. This was my first lesson of comparison being the thief of joy. The self-obsessed years of my teenagehood meant when I dabbled in the art of comparison, I solely focused on looks and looks alone. But as I chipped away into my 20s, I found a Pandora's box of things to compare. My looks would remain a focus, but added to the menu was my salary, my living situation, my intellect, my popularity, my friendships, and my relationships. Nothing was off the cards. Social media's acceleration definitely played a part in this, but I only really have myself to blame for flexing the muscle. My 30s are thankfully less riddled with comparison, but the thoughts still leak in from time to time. Like a valve that never fully closes, I've gotten better at shutting the thoughts out, but every so often the dam breaks, and I'm back to square one, feeling 12, lined up against the cold gym wall, looking at a long line of other people that I don't quite measure up to. So I thought what could be an interesting video format that I could possibly be semi-consistent with, not like incredibly consistent, you know me and YouTube guys, but I wanted to explore this idea of like choosing a theme and maybe me putting forward some of my ideas like you just heard and how my experience is on that theme, and then getting your guys' input, and we can all relate to each other, and we can all realize that we all struggle with the same things, or maybe we struggle in different ways. You know, people always ask me, like, would I go back and do a podcast like It Gals? And probably not, definitely not on my own. But I thought this could be a fun way of exploring these ideas. Let me know what other themes you'd like. Obviously, we did friendship last time. This time, I want to talk about comparison and how it's affected me in my life and you guys in your life. So leave me in the comments other topics that you think would be interesting for you all to relate to. My audience on here is mostly people in their like later 20s, early 30s, so maybe a couple of years younger than I am. I'm 34, and you know, we can all share. So I asked you guys what your opinions or what your experiences, should I say, are within comparison throughout your life. So let's take a look at what you've struggled with. It was never an issue until I entered my late 20s. Now I feel like I'm in a race with everyone around me. I remember that feeling toward my late 20s. Like, the weird thing about it is, like, so much of your life you feel like everyone's on the same kind of like path, especially when you come out of school. Like, most people either start working or they go to university, and if you're in university or college or whatever else, or like further education, um no matter what, you guys are all on the same path because you're all in and around the same year, you're all coming up to exams at the same time. And even though there obviously are like factors and variables that you can compare yourself to, ultimately you're all pretty much in the same pot. But once you leave that and then everyone starts working, I felt that there was such an acceleration and change in people's living situations, change in people's lives. I moved away for a bit, and although at the time that probably felt like, woohoo, I'm getting out of here, when I came home, a lot of my peers had been working for a couple of years, therefore their salaries were much better than mine. I came home with, like, yes, work experience, but I had to then start from the bottom at around, I think I was 24, nearly turning 25. And then also, I guess the housing crisis began to accelerate toward my later 20s. And it was really hard to justify moving out of my parents' house because I lived so close to town. I obviously paid rent to live here, but it was nothing in comparison to what I would have been paying if I found an apartment. Oh, I've got mascara on my arm. Ultimately, that led me to feel like I was losing the race of life almost, because so many people that I knew were already living on their own. So that feeling of it being a race, it's funny because it feels like it hits you all of a sudden out of nowhere. And when it does hit you and you feel like you're behind, it's really hard to, I guess, kind of square the circle of like, oh my God, how did everyone, it feels like, how the fuck did you guys all figure it out before me? Like, how did you get so far ahead of me? And that was just for me, it was like work and living. But I know a lot of people feel it with like relationships. And I definitely felt it with friendships because I felt like I was like 27, 28, and I didn't really feel like I had like best friends, but I didn't have this like group of people that like, and that's something I've always struggled with throughout my whole life. I've never felt comfortable in groups. So therefore I've never felt a part of a group. And even though I don't really want to be part of a group, that's the weirdest thing about it. Anyway, comparison for me has absolutely spiraled since having children. I used to compare myself, now I compare my kids. That's the funny thing about comparison. Like, I don't have children, so I can't relate on that, but I do hear a lot of my friends and peers who have children that like you suddenly like you care less about yourself. Obviously you're less self-centered because you can't be self-centered, but then you start to compare like your parenting, your children, like what you can give your children, what you feel like you're lacking. Like some people are, seemingly able to give their children everything and get childcare and not feel guilty about it, and you might feel like guilty about leaving your children with someone else or wanting to go back to work. Like, I can only imagine that struggle, and it's something that like scares me and like gives me a bit of paralysis around children, because I'm just like, how will I be able to manage it, and am I ready to give up certain things? And that's like definitely like a bit of like navel gazing luxury on everyone my age's behalf. I think like because we have so many choices now, it's almost ruined it. Because whereas, and like, look, I think obviously everyone should have the choice whether they want a child or not, because a lot of people shouldn't have children who have them. Um, but like sometimes when you have so much choice, it makes you just overthink things. Whereas before, when it was just like, oh, you just get married and have kids, like you don't weigh up all the options. But again, I don't think that like that's a net negative. But I think that's the funny thing about comparison, is that like it is a muscle that you train. And even though you're still comparing, even though you're not comparing yourself anymore, now you're comparing your kids, and possibly, maybe, I don't want to put words in your mouth, like your ability to be a parent, ability to be a mother. It's just exhausting. And I think with comparison, like, it will always exist. Like, we will always compare ourselves. I think that's normal. I remember when I was in therapy, um I talked to my therapist about something that I was like, I feel like I'm really judgmental, and I've been told I'm really judgmental, and I struggle with that, and I struggle with like, making judgments about people in my life. And does that mean that like I just felt like I was like, oh my God, who do I think I am? And my therapist was like, Jenny, like, that's what we do. He's like, that's like, judgment is not always negative. That like sometimes judgment can help you, can steer you in the right direction. Um, Obviously, being too judgmental overall isn't a good thing. And I think that's the same with comparison. I think it's like we will probably always compare to an extent. Like, it's very hard to not like see things your friends are doing, whether it's children, their houses, whatever else, and not go, oh, mine's not as good as that, or oh, mine's not as big as that, or my kid's not as well behaved as them, or whatever else. My salary isn't as much as yours. But I think it's about like trying to nip it in the bud, because if there's one thing I've learned about comparison, it's that it is literally like going to the gym. And if you train that muscle, that's where your muscle memory will always go back to that. Comparison is truly the thief of joy for me. I always diminish my own achievements by comparing them, particularly in college, school, with sport, A teams and B teams, and running times. It's a curse. Oh, bitch. I completely relate to this. Like, it's a real frustration of mine and a character fault of mine. Like, I'll like say, for example, like we bought our house, okay? I cannot help sometimes like comparing then the house I bought to other people's house, which is so stupid. Like, I realize, like, and it's such a privilege. And again, like, I don't mind outing my own faults for these videos because I feel like it's how we all relate. But it's so it's so pointless of me to do, but I do it where I'm like, you know, oh, well, like our house is in bits and we've had to do so much work to it. And some people buy houses that they just walk into, or some people are able to buy much bigger homes. And like, oh my God, if we want a bigger, like, and it's just like, it frustrates me to no end. And it really does steal your joy. That saying, I always try and tell myself comparison is the thief of joy. It will only destroy joy and pleasure and celebration for you. But that doesn't mean that I'm like, I try to get better at it. And I think especially with teams, like I was a pretty athletic kid, and I think although sports can teach you so much good stuff when it comes to applying yourself, all of these things, like it can also breed comparison because at times you are going to be like, in order to get ahead, I have to beat all of these people. It does train that in your brain. Yeah, there is a bit of the A team, B team. Like I was like that in swimming as well. Like, you know, was like making finals, like when people were moving up in like, because we all trained in lanes, was like, you know, the fastest lane, and like I'd be in the second fastest, and I always felt like I was never the top of the top. I was always like almost there, but it's like that doesn't mean that you're not doing well. You know, it's hard. It's a struggle. Here's a funny one. My ex situationship's new girlfriend looks like my twin. Look, if I've learned anything, like I will always take it as a compliment. If someone, like if my ex or if someone who like situationship kind of thing, if they get with someone who I can see a resemblance in of me, I'm like, oh well, at least I am your type. You know, it's only ever been weird for me when like an ex or something that gets at someone that I'm like, you did you even like me? Because like her and I, we are not even like, never mind the same, a different font. Like we're not even in the same category. Like she is so like different looking to me that I'm like, was I some sort of like weird fetish? Sometimes comparison is needed for motivation, but can definitely affect confidence if feeling low. Yeah, I think that's true. It's like sometimes comparison is really good. And it goes back to what I was talking about with like sports and like how that breeds in some healthy levels of comparison. But it's just about like catching yourself when you're like going down that like rabbit hole, for want of a better word, of just everything about a person you comparing. And I think also on that, sometimes like we only think of comparison in terms of like looks, but there are so many ways that you can compare yourself to your peers that are equally as toxic, like your salary, like your living situation, like your relationships. That's a huge one that people wrote into me about, like insta perfect relationships. It's not something I've actually ever really struggled myself, um but I guess probably more so as I grow older. Something I have learned though is that like 9 times out of 10, not everyone, but 9 times out of 10, the loudest voices in the room are the most unhappy. So, like, the people with the like most outrageous public displays of affection, most like just the loudest people about their relationship oftentimes are trying to make up for something. And I've witnessed that like time and time again. I've seen people put up Instagram posts of them and their partner, and then the next day break up. You know what I mean? Like gushing posts about how incredible they are, and then the next day they're not together anymore. It's like they were killing each other, you know? So oftentimes there is a quiet confidence in most relationships. And if someone isn't, some of the strongest couples I know aren't posting about their relationship all the time, put it that way. The thought of there's always someone better out there stresses me out, whatever the topic. I know, like, there is a funny thing about that. Like, I don't really get that in terms of like relationships. I've never really experienced that, but I've known people to, and it does take away from your enjoyment with that person, I think. But I think that can be applied to anything. Like, you know, you buy a car, well there's a better car, or you buy a house, oh there's better houses, or you get a job, well there's better jobs. It's like there's always going to be something better than what you have, but like better is only like a quantifiable measure because you're making it that way. Like, yeah, there could be a better job, but like on paper, but they're going to be possibly more stressed. It mightn't be in as good of a company. Like I've had jobs where I was paid fuck all, but I had so much fun that then when I went to a better job that made me more money, I was miserable because like the people weren't as fun, they weren't as nice, I didn't get on with them. The the what's it called? What do they call it? In God, I haven't worked in an office in so long. The culture of the company was very toxic. So just because something is better on paper doesn't mean that you're going to be happier. And that's a big fucking lesson that I learned throughout life. It's really put me into a spiral. With age, it's gotten so much worse. I'm in my 30s and feel because I never went to Australia, I never married, I'm inadequate. It's worse because of Instagram, seeing people you went to school with living amazing lives in different cities. It's a huge regret not going to Australia mainly, and comparison is something I struggle with every day. Yeah, like I think when I was younger, people were emigrating, but definitely not. I mean, I've seen the numbers are huge now and I understand why, but like people weren't emigrating, especially to Australia, quite as much. A lot of people were doing like what I did, the graduate visa to America. So you would go away for a year or two, but you'd come back. What I will say, what I've learned, okay, because a lot of people, a big place where most people were moving to when I was younger anyway was London. I'm sure people are obviously still moving there. One thing I've noticed and one thing I've learned, they almost always come back. Um, and they struggle with everything that I struggle with when I come back. I've had friends move back from London and they're like, fucking floundering around. They don't know where to live. They don't know the buzz. They don't know what restaurants. I'm like, look, those things aren't important in the grand scheme of life. But what I mean is like everyone's a newbie then, and a lot of people will move back to like raise their family, settle down, or their parents are getting older, so they want to be closer to their parents or whatever else that may be. So I was actually watching my friend James's TV show about him and his partner William finding a home right outside of Dublin. And they were talking to William's dad about where the house was, okay, the area. And William's dad said something really poignant that I was like, wow, I've never heard someone at least vocalize it this way. He was like, look, if there's one thing I've learned about in life, it's that places aren't that important. Like, it's who you meet, who you love, the people that you connect with that is important. Places ultimately at the end of your life, when you are reflecting on it, aren't that important. And I think with that can go in with traveling. Like, of course, it can be an amazing experience to live abroad, to move to Australia, to live for a brief moment in time, a very pleasurable life with sun and all this kind of stuff. But like, ultimately, the importance isn't really there. The importance is like the work you do on yourself and who you meet and connect with. Now, there's also, of course, there's a separate kind of problem with that, with people moving away, because it means you've less people to connect to. Your friends can feel like they're moving on in life, where you can feel stagnant, right? To not move away. But I think that is a very specific Irish thing. That's what I learned throughout my years, that like we have a real idea of success and it's moving away from Ireland. Whereas even though our country is incredibly flawed, don't get me wrong, like there is a strength in staying in Ireland too, or coming back to Ireland and trying to make the country work for you. Because ultimately, I will promise you, 9 times out of 10, they'll all move home and they'll all be hitting you up. Comparison is where I'm at in life. I compare myself to my friends, people who've had similar upbringings to me. It's hard that I can't afford to even rent in Dublin, yet I see friends buying houses. I'm delighted for them, but I find it hard that I can't see that happening for me anytime soon. I don't really compare my looks, body, personality, intelligence. It's mostly life stage related. Yeah, like, and I think that, like, as I touched on it earlier, that there's different kinds of comparison, and it's definitely something I've struggled with. Like, as I've grown older, I don't really compare myself in looks, especially to like other people. Like, I find that truly pointless, because it's like your face is your face, like your body's your body. Like, what's the point in me comparing my body to like Bella Hadid? Like, pointless. I can understand why people do it. I have sympathy for people who get locked in that loop, because, as I said, it is a muscle that you just learn to flex. But it's very hard not to compare yourself to where people are in life. I think no matter if it's relationships, living situation, everything else like that, because it can feel, once again, it's like, how do you have it figured out and I don't? I struggle with that so much now. Ironically, I'm back living in this house, but when I lived at home, and like so many of my friends like figured out how to like move away and get their own apartments or like rent in Dublin. And but it felt like they figured out something that I didn't know how to do. And I saw people younger than me renting. I saw people working in like, less good jobs renting, and I was just like, I just don't understand how you afford it. Like, I can barely afford like living at home with my parents. And I think ultimately, you just never know what's going on in someone's finances. You never know if someone's getting help. You never know if someone got a deal. All of these things, you don't know how much people are on. Like, and again, it's futile because unless you're going to copy and paste your life onto their life onto you, how are you going to figure it out, you know? But I do relate because I have been there and it's really, really hard. And it can feel again like you're on a treadmill, kind of standing still where everyone else is accelerating beyond a point, you know? Oh my God. This submission, it's like your toxic voice speaking, and I totally relate. Work relationships and promotions. I don't want them until I see someone else gets the promotion. What the fuck? I totally get this. That used to happen to me in work all the time. Like I'd be like, oh, I'm fine in my job, and then someone get a promotion. I'd be like, why didn't they offer it to me? Yeah, I relate. I mean, there's nothing really I can add to that, but I think it's funny to point out the ridiculousness of comparison sometimes. Instagram and TikTok are the devil, but we are all in denial. I just want to see and feel included. I think inclusion is something that I've struggled with so much. And I don't know, like, not to get all like deep and like, what's the word? I don't know, but not to get all deep basically. But you know, it's me. I always get fucking deep. I can't help myself. I don't know where my like childhood wound is, where it's like I must have been like, I must have found out once that like I wasn't invited to something and it really fucking hurt me because it is such a huge trigger for me that like I'll want to get invited to things that I don't want to go to. And it's so stupid. It is so pointless. Don't get me wrong. I'm just again airing out my vices and airing out my flaws for the greater good of this video. But like I struggle so much with that idea of like I could be live my life happy, chilling, and then I'll see like I don't know if it's like two friends of mine hanging out, or I'll see even like sometimes it can be like work events or whatever else it is. It doesn't matter. There's no point in me like making up hypotheticals because you all understand what I mean. But I will see something that I wasn't invited to, but like that's so self-indulgent to think that like why wouldn't they invite me? It's like because you're not the center of everyone's fucking life, you know? But again, it is like a weird, it must be a childhood wound of mine. I don't know what it was, whether it was a birthday party. I'd love to know where that comes from me because it's something I've tried. It's something I've tried to figure out, but I can't figure out. But it is a trigger for me, and I think once you know it's your trigger, or like you know that it can like instigate feelings of unworthiness, then at least you can at least square the circle in your own mind of like, okay, I'm just feeling a little bit wounded right now. This is like bringing up something from, I don't know whether it's my childhood or what it is, but you know, what you're feeling isn't essentially real in the sense that those people aren't purposely excluding you. You're just taking things personally that shouldn't be personal. I think it comes also from a lot of like never really feeling fully like you were able to fit in, like maybe masking a lot. I feel like the more I grow older, I've realized I've masked a lot socially. Like I've been able to put on the mask as someone who is extroverted, whereas I'm not. So it drains me a lot, you know. Something I'm still trying to figure out about myself. I was constantly compared as a child, really struggling with it now as an adult. That's really hard. And I've heard that a lot with people with um specifically siblings of the same gender. Like a lot of sisters getting compared or a lot of brothers getting compared to each other. Or I'm sure it can happen like intergender as well, whereas like you know the brother is the apple of the parent's eye. And I think it just shows so much like it's so important how we speak to children, but like again, like we're all flawed people, so that then puts a lot of so much pressure on parents. Oh, it is such a fucking mindfuck, isn't it? Learning astrology helped me a lot. I could see what areas of life would bring me fulfillment versus where I may have less growth overall. It made it easier not comparing in those areas. And look, that is such a great fucking point. Even if like if astrology isn't your route to getting to that, like understanding that like there are just going to be areas where we are going to flourish and where others won't, and they might be comparing themselves to you, you know, like understanding that like you might be a really career driven person and like accelerating a career is going to be where you will find a lot of success, but you might not be a very, I don't know, friendship motivated person or whatever else, or it could be like financial versus being creative. Like you might be an incredible artist, but like because your like focus isn't on finances, you might not be a millionaire, you might be able to pay your bills, but like therefore it can help you kind of remove yourself from comparing, because we all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, and we're all not going to be 100% at everything in our life. It's an impossible thing to expect. Oh, here's a good one, kind of on what I just said. My mom would always compare me to my sister and friends growing up. I do think it was her projecting, but I think it's interesting how comparison is particularly a woman, whether female, cis, or not, experience, but it's also passed down generationally. I think we often contribute the comparison epidemic to social media, which is a huge part, but it's also something that has plagued with us for generations. I wonder if there's a biological or anthropological research evidence, or is it human nature? Why is it such a female experience? Is it even mainly a female experience? Sorry for the message. You're my favorite person on the internet. Oh my God, thank you so much. That is such an astute thing to say, because I feel like nowadays, like, we're so afraid of like categorizing things by gender, or saying like, oh well, that's a real female thing or that's a girly thing, because people can be like, stop limiting women, blah 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 blah. But there are essential things that like women do that I find that most men don't do. Like I do, I hate to sound like Jordan Peterson, but like I do think there are differences in our brains at times. And again, as this girl said, um, whether cis or not, this is something I see in, a lot of women that I know. Um, and yeah, I don't know whether you could attribute it to like the patriarchy of sorts, where it's like, are we taught it's nature, or is it nature, or is it nurture? Like, is it like, was it nurture and now it's become nature because it's almost been ingrained in us to be like, how am I in comparison to other women? Because I don't compare myself to men. Like, and that's a funny thing. And I'd love to know whether you're the same if you are a woman. Um, do you compare yourself to men? Because I don't. Like, men to me, I'm just like, and that's how I should view everyone. Because like I'll just be like, oh, like the men are on their own journey, like whatever. Like I can't relate to that shit. But it's like I will always compare myself to other women, whether that's less so now. I very rarely will compare myself in looks. If I'm gonna be comparison about looks, it's probably about like my own looks of when I was younger or skinnier or whatever else. Um, but like I never compare myself to men, even my male friends, right? I'm never like, oh, he has so many more friends than I do. But I'll do it to women. So I don't know whether it's like this want of being accepted, like to want to be accepted by other women by appearing more like them or on their level, or is it because I can see my experience in a woman more easily when it comes especially to like, if I'm looking at other like straight women, like their relationships, or like whether they have children, or how they are in their career. Is it easier for me, and is it easier for us as women to compare ourselves to women because we know the struggles of other women, whereas like the struggles of other men aren't as relatable to us? And is that maybe why men don't compare themselves to women as much, because there is that chalk and cheese thing where it's like, I can't relate to your struggles. Like, even if you are a more feminine man, like I can't relate as a woman to your struggles as like a man growing up as gay in a very heteronormative world. Something to think about anyway. Compared with class differences can be hard to accept at times. I feel guilty comparing myself to others. I recognize it's because I've unfinished work within me. Now they're from the same person, so I don't know whether they meant to, like, I don't know whether they're one thought, but like I think ultimately, people can bang on about like men and women or patriarchy. I think like ultimately what really separates us all is class. Like I do think that most things can be boiled down to class issues rather than identity issues. And that's why I think like class consciousness is like such an important idea to wrap your head around. However, like it's funny when you say like I feel like I've unfinished work within me, but then you talk about class differences, because like there is a fucking hard pill to swallow sometimes, that like whether you are like a more middle class person like myself, like you have to realize that like you will get upper hands in life due to that. And there's no amount of inner work sometimes. And I get so frustrated when I see people like talk about maybe people from lower classes in that sense that like, oh, they just need to work on themselves. And I'm like, what a privileged fucking position. Like so much of our discourse around like mental health and around like mindfulness and all this kind of stuff are like so painfully middle class. And look, we all go into it. I'm sure I do too. I'm not saying I'm fucking above it or whatever. The privilege to be able to think of these things, whereas like people from lower classes like don't have that privilege to be sitting around fucking drinking their water, going for like mental health hot girl walks. Like, give me a fucking break. Anyway, I'm going on a tangent. I need to bring it back to my point. And yeah, there is like sometimes when you do compare yourself to others, like I can get a guilt too because I'm like, or you can get this kind of like it's almost like a red flag within yourself. You're like, I'm being a little salty because I have unfinished work in this area and it's clearly like fucking triggering me, like where, or like I might be jealous of her because she's really confident and like I'm not confident in that area. So there is a bit of there's a way up there, but I think that is a very astute point. Comparison stops me from embracing the now, thinking I should be somewhere else in my journey. Yes, like the amount of times we've all probably been comparing ourselves to someone and not being able to enjoy the present, it's so toxic. It's powerful and detrimental. It inspires me to make change, or other times it can make me insecure. And I think that we've said that earlier, like it can be a tool to push you on, but ultimately, like, I think if you're making all your decisions based on comparison, that's ultimately toxic, even if it's making you determined. Because, like, we've all heard those people, like, I want to be the best to, like, show everyone that I'm blah, blah, blah. And, like, it's just a bit nasty. Like, I think you can use it as, like, a starting point for determination. But if it's your only source of inspiration, that's when it's toxic, I think. Oh, so try being a twin. Comparison never ends. I could not imagine that, especially if you were like identical twins. Awful. I could like, because it's like, how can you not be compared? Like, if all siblings are compared in some sense, imagine being a fucking identical twin. I could not. Feeling like my boyfriend isn't good enough for me based on perceptions of other people's relationships that I view online. Then being chronically unhappy even though he treats me so well. And it's like you're kind of like you're outing yourself here. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way, because I think we've all been here where you're like, I know that this person's nice to me, but what is stealing my happiness in the relationship right now is not how I'm being treated. It is my own doing, because I'm comparing it to like Molly May and fucking Tommy Fury. Or like I'm comparing it to my ex best friend and her new relationship. And it's just like, no matter how many, isn't it funny that no matter how many times we hear the internet isn't reality. And like I roll my eyes when influencers post those things when they're like, just your daily reminder that the internet isn't real. Like, here's what I've been struggling with this week. I do roll my eyes when people post those things, or like crying selfies. Don't get me fucking started. But like, it is true. Like, no matter how much we hear it, we are yet to acknowledge it sometimes, and it can steal our joy. So just, I think it's about what you tell yourself. Like a lot of it is self talk. Like if you're constantly saying, my relationship isn't good enough, look at this relationship, you're going to start believing it. Whereas you should just concentrate on how someone treats you. Words are words, but actions are another thing. Finally, we'll end on this note. Comparison makes me put down the other person and be mean when I compare, especially if I know them well. Yeah, like it's like that idea of like we lash out and we're the meanest to the people that are closest to us, and it's part of the human condition. It's not nice, but it is a reality. But yeah, like it's a tough one, because when you have, even when you have that self aware level, it can be only when you remove yourself. Like you might be like a day later where you're like, I was nasty because I was fucking jealous. Like comparison ultimately breeds jealousy, and we know that jealousy is not a good place to be in. It's like so incongruous to how we want to live our life, because we want to be happy, we want to be happy with ourselves, but sometimes like you can get caught in this loop, this toxic loop of comparing yourself to others, being unhappy, and then your unhappiness makes you jealous, and then once you see jealousy you see it everywhere, and once you find something to pick apart, you'll pick apart your life for the rest of your life. I hope this maybe helped some of you all realize that we all do these things. Maybe it's made me think about what that one person submitted about whether it's like a nature or nurture thing with women. very interesting. I'd love to read into that more. Let me know if there's other topics that you would like me to discuss. Leave them in the comments because I'll take them from the people who actually watch the videos. I won't say I'll see you next week, but hopefully I'll see you soon.